I need you to understand something before I begin. I was the one who told the galaxy that humans were not real. I wrote the official paper. I gave the speeches. I stood before the Concord Assembly, all 12 species watching me, and I told them with absolute confidence that this strange, persistent legend of soft-skinned bipedal creatures was nothing more than a fairy tale, a myth passed between dying civilizations like a shared dream. I was celebrated for it. They gave me awards. They carved my name into the wall of clarity at the Great Archive. I was wrong. I was so completely, so beautifully wrong. My name is Valith Sarani, and I am the senior archival lorekeeper of the Concord of 12 systems. For 140 cycles, my work has been the study of the dead. I travel to ruined worlds. I translate the final writings of species that no longer exist. I organize their bones and catalog their last words. It is quiet, lonely, important work, and I have loved every moment of it. But there was always one thing that troubled me. Across dozens of dead civilizations, scattered across thousands of light years, separated by thousands of years of history, I kept finding the same strange reference. Different species, with no possible connection to each other, all describe the same thing. A species with 2 arms and 2 legs, soft skin with no armor, no venom, no telepathy, no claws, dull, flat teeth, an endoskeleton hidden beneath thin muscle. By every measure of galactic biology, the most fragile intelligent species imaginable. And yet, every single account described them with fear, not disgust, not amusement, fear. One ancient text carved into stone called them the Enduring. Another, painted in pigment on the inner wall of a collapsed temple, called them those who rage against silence. A third civilization, one so old that only a single wall of their greatest city still stood, had scratched 4 words into the rock before they disappeared forever. The words said simply, "They do not stop." I collected these references for decades. I studied them, I cross-referenced them, and then I did what any respectable scholar would do. I explained them away. I wrote my famous paper, a thick and carefully argued document that proved, using statistics and cultural analysis, that the human myth was simply a shared anxiety. Dying civilizations, facing their own end, invented an imaginary predator to blame. It was a coping mechanism, a collective ghost story. Nothing more. The Concord believed me. The Kreth, those enormous insectoid warriors with their razor-sharp limbs, laughed at the very idea. Something soft being dangerous? Ridiculous. The Orventhi, a hive mind species that thought in pure mathematics, ran their probability models and determined that a species matching the human description had a survival probability of 0.0003%. Effectively impossible. I filed my petition. The Concord officially reclassified humans from plausible uncontacted species to mythological entity. No further investigation warranted. The file was closed, and I felt very proud of myself. Not everyone agreed, of course. There was Dorvan, an old Halori astrophysicist who had spent decades studying signal patterns along the edge of the outer void, the vast, unmapped darkness beyond the borders of known space. He claimed he had detected structured electromagnetic patterns out there, not random noise, not natural phenomena, something intentional, something new. I debated him publicly, and I won. He was mocked, defunded, stripped of his credentials, and sent to live in exile on a frozen moon at the edge of nowhere. I did not feel guilty about this at the time. I was certain I was right. There were others too. Traders from the galactic rim who swore they had seen ships on the far edge of their sensors, enormous and graceless, before vanishing like smoke. A dying Krevali prophet who grabbed my arm with her last strength and whispered, "They are not myths, lorekeeper. They are patient." I dismissed them all, every single one. Then, the Kasari vanished. The Kasari Dominion was the most powerful military force in the Concord. They were massive creatures, covered in natural silicon armor, standing 3 times the height of most other species. Their fleet numbered 14,000 warships. They feared nothing in the known galaxy, and for good reason. They had been expanding into unclaimed space along the outer void, pushing their borders outward as they always did. And then, without warning, they were gone. The entire Armada. 14,000 ships, millions of soldiers. Orbital stations, supply lines, all of it, gone. One ship came back. A single, battered scout vessel, drifting without power. The crew was dead, all except the pilot, who had used her own claws to scratch a message into the metal hull plating before she passed. The message read, "They were not a myth." The Concorde panicked. Deep-range probes were sent into the void. None of them returned. 7 cycles later, we received a transmission. It came from the void, broadcast on every frequency at the same time, which our scientists said was impossible. But the truly impossible part was the language. The message was delivered in every language the Concorde had ever recorded, not just the 12 living languages of our member species. Every language, including the dead ones. Languages spoken by civilizations that had been dust for 10,000 years. Languages that existed only in my own archive. The message was short. "We know you told stories about us. Some were even close. We are ready to stop being a story now. We are coming to talk. Do not shoot. You will not get a second chance to make that choice." I cannot describe the chaos that followed. Governments collapsed into emergency sessions. The Kreth mobilized every warship they had. The Orventhi hive mind fractured into conflicting strategic loops, arguing with itself for the first time in recorded history. Species that had not spoken to each other in decades suddenly needed to talk very quickly. And I was summoned from retirement. The foremost expert on the myth nobody believed in was suddenly the most important person in the Concorde. They also found Dorvan. He was still on his frozen moon, still studying his signals. They brought him before the assembly. He said nothing. He simply looked at me and smiled. Then came the emergence. The most witnessed event in the history of our galaxy. Along the entire border of the outer void, across a front spanning thousands of light years, space began to change. It did not tear. It did not fold. It rippled, gently, as if reality itself was being politely asked to step aside. And they came through. Ships. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands upon thousands. Ships of every size and shape. Some were sleek and sharp. Some were massive and industrial, built for work rather than beauty. Some looked ancient, scarred by centuries of travel and struggle. Some were new, gleaming, fresh from construction. No two ships looked the same. Every single one was different, as if each had been designed by a different mind, with a different dream, all united by one unmistakable purpose. They were here, and they wanted to be seen. Our sensor stations flooded with data. The fleet was broadcasting identification, not serial numbers, names. Every ship had a name that meant something. Defiance. Remember us. Second chance. Never again. Pale blue dot. Stubborn hope. Ad Astra. One by one, the names rolled across our screens like poetry written in steel. At the center of the Armada, one ship stood apart. It was larger than anything the Concorde had ever built. Larger than some moons. It broadcast a single name on an open channel that every species in the galaxy could hear. Perseverance. Our sensor arrays tried to count the fleet. They failed. The number was beyond their processing capacity. They simply gave up and returned an error none of us had ever seen before. Value exceeds recordable range. A delegation was arranged. I insisted on being present. The scholar who had denied their existence deserved to face what they had denied. I saw a human, for the first time, in a sealed diplomatic chamber aboard the Perseverance. They were exactly as the myths described. Small by our standards, soft, no visible natural weapons of any kind. 2 arms, 2 legs, thin skin stretched over a hidden skeleton. Flat teeth, short, blunt fingernails. But their eyes. I need to talk about the eyes. Not because they were alien or frightening. They were not. They were small and round and unremarkable by biological standards. But they held something I had never seen in any species across 140 cycles of study. An emotion my language does not have a word for. It was sadness, and determination, and warmth, and iron, all at once, all held together without contradiction. I would later learn that humans call this feeling resolve. Their delegation was led by a woman. She was small and old, with gray hair and a calm, quiet voice. She introduced herself as Fleet Admiral Marin Vasquez, commander of the Terran outbound Armada. She smiled when she spoke. She was polite. She was patient. She was the most terrifying being I had ever encountered. She told us their story. Humans evolved on a world they called Earth. A small, blue, fragile-looking planet that was, in reality, a death trap. A corrosive oxygen atmosphere. Wild temperature swings. Tectonic plates that crack the ground open without warning. An entire biosphere designed to eat them. A magnetic field barely strong enough to keep their sun from cooking them alive. They should not have survived. But they did. They did not merely survive. They conquered their own world, and then left it. They reached into space, and found silence. No signals. No neighbors. Nothing. The emptiness nearly destroyed them. They fought among themselves. They poisoned their own world. They came close to ending their own story more than once. But every time they fell, they stood up again. Every time the universe told them they were alone and meaningless, they answered by building something bigger, reaching something farther, dreaming something louder. They found the ruins of dead civilizations in the void, species the Concorde had never reached. And in those ruins, they found references to us. They learned they were not alone. But they also learned something else. Every civilization that had tried to reach the Concorde from the darkness had been ignored, dismissed, forgotten. So the humans made a decision. They would not come to us as beggars. They would not ask for permission to exist. They would build and grow and endure until they could walk through our door as equals. It took them 2,000 years. The Concorde demanded to know about the Kesari. Admiral Vasquez's expression changed. The warmth did not leave her eyes, but something harder moved behind it. She explained. The Kesari Armada had entered a region of space where billions of humans lived. Civilian worlds, families, children. The Kesari did not attempt communication. They opened fire on the first colony they found. 30 million people were lost in the first strike. The chamber fell silent. The humans responded with everything they had. The engagement lasted 11 hours. When it was over, the Kesari fleet no longer existed. 14,000 warships. Gone. Vasquez paused. Her voice dropped low, and I saw something in her face that I will never forget. It was grief. Real, heavy, personal grief. She said, "We are not proud of those 11 hours. We carry them. We remember every life that ended, theirs and ours together. We built a monument in orbit above the colony they struck. Every Kesari name we could recover is written on that wall, right beside every human name, equal, together. We will carry that weight forever. But we will not apologize for protecting our children. We will never apologize for that." Several Concorde delegates wept openly. I was one of them. Vasquez then told us what humanity wanted. They did not want to conquer us. They did not want to join the Concorde as it was. They wanted to change it, to make it what it always claimed to be, a true union of equals, where no voice from the darkness goes unheard. The Armada, she said, was not a threat. It was a credential, proof that they deserved to be taken seriously. But if the Concorde chose to respond with force, they should understand that the fleet visible on our sensors was not the full fleet. It was not even close. She leaned forward and said, very quietly, "We spent 2,000 years learning to survive in the dark. You spent 2,000 years pretending the dark did not exist. Please do not make us show you what lives out there." The Concorde fractured. The Kreth wanted to fight. The Orventhi could not agree with themselves. But the smaller species, the ones who had always lived in the shadow of larger powers, saw something in humanity they recognized. A protector. A voice for those who had been ignored. I was asked to speak. The great denier. The one who called them a fairy tale. I stood before the assembly, and I said this. I spent my life studying the dead. I read their final words. I organized their bones. And I missed the single most important truth buried in every record I ever touched. Every dead civilization I studied died calling for help, and nobody came. The humans heard them, 2,000 years too late, but they heard them. They came. If we turn them away now, we deserve to become the next set of ruins that someone catalogs. The vote passed. Humanity was welcomed. Not as members, but as partners in building something new. Years have passed since then. I visited Earth, a small, blue, wild, impossible world. I stood on a green hillside and watched water fall from the sky, and I understood how a world this dangerous could produce a species this stubborn. I visited the monument above the ruined colony. A vast, dark wall, hanging in orbit, art covered in names. Kesari and human, side by side, remembered equally. I found Dorvan one last time. He was living on a human colony now, studying their technology, happier than I had ever seen him. He looked at me with those old, tired, kind eyes and said, "The myths were always the truest thing in your archive, old friend. You just did not want to believe anything that wonderful could be real." He was right. I was a lorekeeper. I kept the old stories. But I forgot the first rule of stories, the rule that every species learns eventually, whether they want to or not. The stories that survive, the ones that get told again and again, across species and centuries, and the black distance between stars, are the ones that are true. Humans were a story. They were the truest story the galaxy ever told. And now, finally, we are listening.